Hey everyone, welcome to my apartment in Raleigh, North Carolina. My name is Phil Wallace. I am a senior QA analyst at Epic Games on the Unreal Engine team. And my talk today is a little bit called How Being Disabled Prepared Me for a Career in QA. Some quick facts about me. I was born September 28th, 1983 in Norfolk, Virginia. I graduated high school in 2002 and graduated from Virginia Tech in 2007. I have 11 years of experience in the gaming industry as QA and an associate producer. I'm a self-taught programmer, C, C++, C Sharp, Python. I got my start programming back in the early 2000s on MUDs, and I sort of just kept the hobby as it grew and as new languages came out. And like I said, currently I'm a senior QA analyst on the Unreal Engine team. On the foundation pillar, I deal with the cooker and packaging and all of those low-level things that really are important for making sure that people can publish their games on the Unreal Engine. So some things that I've worked on in my career, I've worked for EA Mythic, which was my first job. I worked for Bethesda for 5 years, Hi-Rez Studios for about 4.5 years, and now I'm at Epic, which I've been here for over a year. I've worked, on the screen are a couple of projects that I've worked on, Dishonored, Skyrim, Fallout 4, Fallout New Vegas, and of course, the Unreal Engine. I was born with cerebral palsy. So cerebral palsy is a disability often that comes about at birth due to brain damage or injury. Symptoms of it are poor coordination, stiff muscles, high muscle spasticity, tremors, sometimes seizures. There are often very issues with senses and motor skills and other related functions of the body. Babies with CP are often developmentally delayed, where we crawl or walk much later than most children do, or in my case, we don't walk independently at all. I walk with forearm crutches, which are necessitated because my balance is very poor, and I use them to basically just get around and ambulate on my own. It was caused, like I said, by brain damage at birth, into mostly for me in areas of motor control and balance in my brain. So what's this have to do with QA? Well, it can be summed up really in one word: tools. Tools are an important part of the evolution of a creature, of an animal or a creature. Oftentimes, when we are looking at the intelligence of an animal, we use the use of tools as a factor of how intelligent they are. Animals that use tools, apes, crows, dolphins, elephants, sea otters, octopi are a very common one. They all use objects in their environment to do various tasks more efficiently. And humans, of course, are really, really good at using tools. We've created our own, starting back in the Stone Age when we first started hitting rocks together and created our first stone tools, and progressed through, the Bronze Age and smelting and smithing metal up until, today we use computers and cars and all sorts of other tools to make our lives easier. In nature, adaptation is survival. If you can't adapt to your environment, you don't survive. That is one of the most critical things a species can be able to do, is to adapt to new conditions and new stimuli in the environment. Being disabled really is a life of adaptation, and adaptation builds independence. As a disabled person, it means that I live in a world that is largely not built for me in mind. there are obviously rules and laws that specify that there must be this many handicap spaces or ramps or accessibility features. But for the most part, buildings and structures and all these different things in life that we come on a day-to-day basis are not built for disabled people with disabilities, whether it's a physical disability, whether you're deaf, whether you are, any other sort of limitation. The world is not built for us. It's not built in a way that is easy for us to access. So in order to remain independent, we have to adapt to this environment that is built differently than from what would be easier for us. And the way we do this, or one of the quickest ways we do this, is by tools. We find new and useful ways to use existing objects outside their normal functions to do everyday tasks. It makes adaptation quicker, and it makes us able to interact with our environment more efficiently without having to reinvent the wheel or reinvent something new and specialized that we would need in other words, to function. A good example of a tool that I use all the time, I use tongs to extend my reach. If I can't bend over to pick up objects off the ground, my flexibility is not that good. So oftentimes if I drop something on the floor and I need to grab it, I have a pair of tongs that are nearby that I use to pick things up off the floor. Another example is, a friend of mine was over one day and I dropped a piece of paper on the floor. And before they even could move to try and grab it, I just used my crutches like a pair of chopsticks or tongs to pick the paper up off the floor and put it back on the table. And the rather bewildered look that I got from my friend was really entertaining, because they didn't expect me to do that with my crutches. They didn't think of my crutches in such a way that they could be used for anything but walking. So I like to tell people to be like Alton Brown, say no to unitaskers. He really hates objects that only have one function. The only unitasker he has in his kitchen, he says, is the fire extinguisher. And I believe he even found a second use for one of those too. So unitaskers are not very useful to people with disabilities. If they only serve one purpose, then it can't be used as a tool to extend and improve our lives. So going back to QA, we run test suites, we run test plans, we run all of these structured paths of testing to ensure that we are getting the most coverage on the most systems in the most efficient way possible. But really, it's when you combine or use systems in new, unique, or unexpected ways that we get some of the best bugs. A lot of times systems are built a certain way without the anticipation that a user is going to use them in a completely unexpected way, and that method is just not handled, which causes a bug and causes unexpected behavior or unintended behavior. So as QA, our job is to think about how a system or feature is supposed to work and then do the exact opposite. That's something I tell testers when I teach them very often, that what we want to do is test all of the obvious situations first and then do the unexpected. Do something that is clearly unintended and see how it handles it, because it very well could break. So I'm going to use a quote from somebody who I look up to, Ralph Koster. From his theory of fun, he says, people are amazing pattern matching machines. And like I said, nobody can anticipate every single use case. We're human. We can only think of, the majority of use cases. But I always tell people, there is always somebody who is smarter or more clever than you out there who's going to find something you didn't find. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't find it as QA testers, but it does mean that it's going to happen. There is always, it's the quote from Star Wars, there's always a bigger fish. Somebody out there is going to find something that you didn't find. And we have to be aware of that, but we also have to mitigate that circumstance. Sometimes the best bugs we find are ones we find when we do something that's not expected, or when we do something unintended, or combine things in different ways. And one of the other things I teach people is bugs are tools too. We should use them. We should take bugs and the experience we have finding bugs and apply them to other systems. At an underlying level, there may be several systems that run very similarly that may exhibit the same bugs, right? Look for patterns. Take the bugs that you find elsewhere and apply them to these patterns, and be that pattern matching machine that we excel at as humans. And ultimately, when all else fails, smash the feature against the proverbial rock. It worked out for our ancestors, right? It's very important that at the end of the day, as QA, we are adaptable and we take the things that we are given to test and we adapt them in new and unique and interesting ways. That's what my whole life has been as a disabled person. It's been a life of adaptation, a life of looking at objects and looking at things in different ways. How can I use this as a tool? How can I use this in another way to improve my life, or to make my life easier, or to make it more efficient? That's what we do as QA. And the best QA testers I've found are the people who can take those principles of adaptation and using things in different, unique ways and apply them to their testing methods to find the weird or esoteric or interesting bugs that may come up. My contact information, you can find me on LinkedIn at linkedin/in.phil-wallace. I'm very happy to network with people. Some citations here, just from where I got my 2 quotes, the one about cerebral palsy and of course the theory of fun from Ralph Koster. And I have some special thanks here for the people who have really made this possible for me, to not only be here today talking, but also just to have made it through the gaming industry for 11 years. It's really amazing the support that I've been given from the many different people on this slide. That being said, thank you very much for listening to my talk. I hope you learned something new or thought about something new, and I look forward to talking to you in the future.